That's not clickbait. It actually happened to me. It started with a tiny rule. Something so small, so harmless, but in my neighborhood, even the smallest thing could wake the devil. The president of our HOA smiled at us. But her smile was sharp. She wanted control. Every mailbox, every flower, every sound of the street, and when my wife refused to bow down, Karen didn't just write a fine. She didn't just leave a note. She pulled out a gun, right in front of everyone. But what happened next, no one in the neighborhood will ever forget. Welcome back to HOA Stories. I'm Daniel, a regular guy living in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Colorado. On the outside, my street looks perfect. Neat lawns, shining fences, kids riding bikes. But behind that perfection lies fear, control, and madness. And this is the story of how one petty HOA rule nearly destroyed everything, until karma showed up with a badge. I thought moving into this neighborhood would bring peace to our lives. A fresh start. In a place where everything looked perfect. You know the kind of street I'm talking about. Every lawn cut to the same height. Every driveway clean. Every mailbox standing like soldiers in a row. From the outside, it felt like safety. But peace is only an illusion. And behind that illusion was something darker. Something rotten that no one warned us about. It started the very first week we moved in. We got the welcome letter, typed in bold letters on crisp white paper, signed with authority. It was from the Homeowners Association. The HOA, rules and regulations, pages upon pages, no paint colors outside their list, no fences over a certain height, no decorations that could disturb the harmony of the neighborhood. Harmony, that was their favorite word. At first I laughed. I thought, how bad can it be? Rules are rules. We could follow them, right? But soon, I realized the rules weren't about harmony. They were about power. My wife, she was always the brave one. She had this calm smile, the kind that made people underestimate her. She loved little details that made a house feel like home. One afternoon, she hung a simple wind chime on the porch. It wasn't flashy, just a gentle piece of metal and glass that sang when the wind touched it. To me, it sounded like peace. To her, it felt like home. But to the HOA president, Karen, it was war. The first time Karen came to our door, she wore that smile, the kind of smile that hides sharp teeth behind it. She tapped her clipboard like a judge. "Violation," she said. Her eyes didn't blink. Her voice carried authority like she was the queen of the street. She ordered my wife to take it down. She said it broke rule number 34. Noise disturbance. That's what she called it. My wife just laughed politely. It's just a wind chime. How could this disturb anyone? But Karen leaned closer, her voice colder. In this neighborhood, everything matters, even the wind. From that day forward, we knew peace was gone. Karen began circling our house like a hawk. Every morning, she walked her dog, but really, she was inspecting, taking pictures, jotting notes, watching. We found letters taped to our door, stamped in red. Remove wind chime or $500 fine. The letters grew louder, bolder, more threatening. And yet, my wife refused to take it down. I admired her strength, but I also feared where this was heading, because when people like Karen lose control, they don't back down. They push harder, until something breaks, and then it escalated. One night, we found an envelope in our mailbox, no return address, no greeting, just a single line in bold capital letters, "Last warning." I remember holding it in my hands, my stomach turning cold. I looked at my wife, but Sue, he wasn't afraid. She smiled, the same calm smile, and whispered, "Let her try." Days turned into weeks. The tension spread like wildfire. Neighbors whispered. Some supported us in secret. Others avoided us completely. Karen stood taller every day, as if this was her battlefield and she was the general. Then came the afternoon by the lake. I'll never forget it. The air smelled of pine and the water shimmered under the sun. We were sitting by the dock, just enjoying the calm. But Karen arrived, storm in her eyes, rage in her hands. She shouted about authority, about rules, about obedience. And then she pulled it out, a handgun, black and cold, pointing straight at my wife. The world froze. My heart pounded so loud. I couldn't hear the birds anymore. It was just her voice, sharp like glass. "This is my authority," she screamed. Neighbors gasped. Some ran. Others just stood frozen. But my wife didn't move. She sat there, calm, smiling, not a trace of fear in her eyes, because she knew something Karen didn't know, something that would change everything in the next few seconds. I remember gripping the wooden bench, my knuckles white, thinking this is it. This is how our peaceful dream ends. But she slowly stood up, one hand raised, her voice calm and steady. "Karen, you don't want to do this." The silence was thick. You could almost hear the water breathe. And then, she reached for her belt the moment her badge flashed in the sunlight. Everything shifted. Deputies hidden in the background started moving. Sirens echoed. Neighbors gasped louder. Karen's mouth fell open. Her authority crumbled in an instant because my wife wasn't just another neighbor breaking rules. She was the county sheriff, and in that moment, the balance of power snapped in half. The lake grew silent after that moment. Karen's gun trembled in her hand. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. The neighbors stared like they had just seen a ghost, because they had never imagined the woman they mocked. A woman they tried to fine, was the very sheriff who upheld the law in our county. But the badge didn't calm Karen. If anything, it made her angrier. Her voice cracked, desperate, wild. "You don't scare me. This is my neighborhood, my rules." She shook the gun, her hands trembling as deputies closed in. I could feel the tension snap in the air like lightning, and yet, my wife stayed calm. Her voice was steady, sharp as steel. "Put the gun down, Karen, before you lose everything." But Karen didn't listen. She screamed about control, about harmony, about how she had built this perfect community with her hands. The truth spilled out in every word. This wasn't about a wind chime. It was about power, about being seen as queen of the cul-de-sac, ruler of fences and flowers. The HOA wasn't her duty. It was her throne. The deputies moved closer, but Karen pointed the gun at all of them. She spun like a cornered animal, desperate, pale. "You don't understand," she cried. "If I lose this, I am nothing." And for the first time, I saw it clearly. This wasn't just madness. It was fear. Karen wasn't protecting the rules. She was protecting the only identity she had. The sheriff in my wife came out fully then. She stepped forward. Slow, steady, fearless. "You are not the law here, Karen. You are just a neighbor." And those words hit harder than the badge ever could. Neighbors gasped. Some clutched their mouths. Others whispered in shock. Because for years, everyone had bowed to her power, and now, it was crumbling. Finally, the deputies rushed in. The gun slipped from her shaking hand and clattered against the dock. The sound echoed across the water like a final bell. Karen was pinned to the ground, screaming, kicking, shouting about her authority, but the fight was already over. She was taken away in handcuffs, hair messy, voice broken, and still, she shouted, "This is my HOA!" The irony tasted bitter in the air. Neighbors stood in silence. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Some looked ashamed for letting it get this far. Others looked relieved, like a heavy chain had just fallen from their necks. And me, I couldn't stop staring at my wife, calm, steady. The quiet sheriff who had finally put an end to a queen without a crown. But that was only the beginning, because even after Karen was gone, the rules didn't vanish. The HOA didn't dissolve. The board still stood, and her loyal followers were still there, whispering, plotting, angry that their queen had fallen. And that's when the real war began. After Karen was taken away in handcuffs, you'd think the nightmare ended, but in this neighborhood, nothing was ever that simple. For a few days, the street felt quiet, no clipped footsteps on the sidewalk, no angry notes taped to doors, no threats stuffed in the mailbox. It felt like a weight lifted, like maybe life could go back to normal. But peace in suburbia never lasts, not when power is on the line, because Karen wasn't just a woman with a clipboard. She was the heartbeat of the board, the others, the vice president, the treasurer, the secretary. They weren't leaders, they were shadows who followed her. And when she fell, those shadows began to move in the dark. It started with whispers. Neighbors passing by our yard would glance at us. Some nodded with quiet respect. Others looked away like we were cursed. I could feel eyes on us from behind curtains, blinds shifting when we stepped outside. We weren't just the new family anymore. We were the ones who broke the queen, and the court was angry. Then came the letters. At first, they were official, typed, polite, pretending to be neutral. Reminder: trash bins must be stored out of sight within 12 hours of collection. Notice: grass height may not exceed 2.5 inches. Little rules, things no one cared about before, but suddenly, we were the only ones receiving them. I walked down the street one morning and saw bins still sitting in driveways. Grass patches taller than mine, but no red stamps on their doors, no warnings in their mailboxes. Just us. We had become the enemy of the board. My wife told me not to worry. She wore her badge with pride, but she also knew the difference between her job and her home. "This is personal," she whispered one night, sipping her coffee on the porch. "They can't use the law, so they'll use the rules." She was right. The fines started stacking $50 here, $100 there, until they threatened thousands. They sent official-looking envelopes every week, each one colder, harsher, bolder. They wanted to break us, not with guns this time, but with paper and ink. And that's when the neighbors began to choose sides. The Smiths down the street started avoiding us. Their kids used to play with ours, but now the bikes turned the other way when they rode past our house. The Johnsons whispered whenever they saw my wife in uniform, their smiles fake, their voices sharp when they thought we couldn't hear. But there were others. The old man on the corner, Mr. Harris, slipped me a note one evening. It said, "Stay strong. She controlled us for years. Not all of us are against you." That note, written in shaky handwriting, felt like a candle in the dark. But candles don't stop storms. The board doubled their efforts. One night, I came home to find yellow tape stretched across our yard, a sign stuck in the ground. Property in violation. It wasn't legal. It wasn't real authority. But it was public shame. Neighbors walked by, eyes wide, some laughing quietly, others pretending not to see. It felt like being branded, marked as the enemy of harmony. I wanted to rip it all down, to scream, to fight back, but my wife just stood there, staring at the tape with calm eyes. "Let them play their games," she whispered. "They don't know who they're playing against." But I could see it in her too. The calm was an act. Inside, the fire was growing. And then came the night that changed everything. We woke at 2 a.m. to a loud bang on our door. I stumbled down the stairs, heart pounding, thinking maybe it was another threat. But when I opened it, there was nothing. Just a crumpled envelope on the welcome mat. Inside was a picture, a photo of our house, taken from across the street. At night, the window blinds half open, light spilling out. My wife visible in her sheriff's uniform inside. On the back, scrawled in red ink, "You don't belong here." I remember the way my stomach twisted. This wasn't rules anymore. This was stalking. This was war. My wife grabbed the photo, her jaw tight, her eyes burning. "They want to scare us," she said softly. "But fear only works when you let it." The next day, she drove to the board's office, not as a neighbor, not as a victim, but as the sheriff. She walked in with the photo in her hand and slammed it on their desk. "This crosses the line," she told them. "This isn't HOA business anymore. This is criminal." The board members, pale, nervous, twitching. They denied everything. They said they didn't know who left it. They smiled fake smiles and talked about misunderstandings. But their eyes gave them away, because fear was no longer ours. It was theirs, still. The games didn't stop. We found our mailbox smashed one morning, another night. We heard footsteps on our porch, but no one there. It became a constant game of shadows and whispers, of glances and rumors. And through it all, the board stood firm, cold, silent, waiting for us to break. But here's the truth. It wasn't us who would break, because when people build their power on fear, all it takes is one moment of courage to pull it all down. And that moment was coming. The night of the smashed mailbox changed something inside me. I stood in the driveway, staring at the bent metal and scattered letters. Owen, that I realized this wasn't just harassment anymore. This was war, not the kind with bullets and blood, but the kind with whispers, rules, and shadows. And my wife, she knew exactly how to fight it. She sat me down at the kitchen table the next morning, a thick binder in front of her, the HOA rulebook, pages upon pages. Lines of small print that most neighbors never bothered to read, but she had read it, every single word. They want to play by the rules, she said quietly, her fingers tracing the text. Then let's give them the rules. At first, I didn't understand, but then she explained, revenge by compliance, we weren't going to break their rules. We were going to follow them. Every single one, so perfectly, so obsessively, that it would tear the HOA apart from the inside. And so it began. We painted the mailbox the exact shade of approved beige listed in the handbook, not lighter, not darker. The exact Pantone code. We measured our lawn every week, trimming it to exactly 2.5 inches, no more, no less. We installed blinds inside our windows, matching the HOA's list of neutral tones. We kept our trash bins hidden behind a custom-built enclosure, perfectly aligned with their specifications. It wasn't just compliance, it was perfection, so flawless, so exact, that they couldn't touch us. But my wife didn't stop there. She dug deeper into the handbook, finding rules nobody ever used, rules so strict, so ridiculous, that if enforced, they'd hurt everyone. And she began filing complaints, not against us, but against the board's own loyal neighbors. Mrs. Johnson had a mailbox 1 inch too tall. Violation. The Smiths had lawn ornaments shaped like flamingos. Violation. The treasurer's son parked his truck on the street overnight. Violation. We sent them all in. Every complaint backed up with the exact page and line from their own handbook. At first, the board read them, but my wife knew the system better than they did. She forced them to acknowledge everyone, because if they didn't, she'd call them out for breaking their own bylaws. Slowly, the perfect neighborhood began to crack. Neighbors started whispering, angry not at us, but at the board. Why were they being fined for bird feeders, for curtains, for flowers planted the wrong way? The same people who once avoided us now knocked on our door, asking questions, wanting answers. And my wife gave them answers. She showed them the handbook, the rules, the truth that the board had hidden in fine print for years. It spread like fire, one by one. Neighbors realized they were trapped in a cage they had never noticed, and Karen's loyalists, they began to lose faith. But the board fought back. They held emergency meetings, changing schedules, rewriting agendas. They tried to silence complaints, to bury letters, to hide what was happening. But my wife was relentless. Every step they took, she countered with the law, the rules, or her badge. They couldn't scare her. They couldn't outsmart her. And worst of all, they couldn't control her. The tension grew heavier every day. At night, I'd sit by the window, watching shadows move under streetlights. Sometimes cars slowed in front of our house. Sometimes notes appeared on our windshield. But inside, we stayed calm, because we weren't breaking. We were winning. Then came the board meeting. It was supposed to be routine, held in the community center with coffee and cookies. But this time, the room was packed, every seat filled. Neighbors standing against the walls, murmurs echoing through the air. The board sat at the front table, pale, stiff, trying to look confident, and my wife walked in, binder under her arm, head held high. When they tried to rush through the agenda, she stood. When they tried to ignore complaints, she spoke. When they tried to dismiss the crowd, she read from the rulebook word for word. And the neighbors, they listened. By the end of that night, the board was cornered, their own rules turned against them, their own neighbors demanding answers, the treasurer sweating, the secretary trembling, the vice president stuttering, and in the back of the room, someone whispered the words that would change everything. Maybe it's time we vote them out. The board froze, because power only lasts as long as people believe in it, and belief was slipping through their fingers that night. We walked home under the glow of streetlights, the binder heavy in her hands, but her smile light as air. For the first time, I saw the cracks spreading not in us, but in them, still. We knew it wasn't over. Desperate people don't surrender quietly. They cling. They fight. They strike back in the dark. And the board was desperate now, cornered animals ready to bare their teeth. The question wasn't if they'd fight back. It was how and when. The street was quiet. Too quiet. Like the calm before a storm, I could feel it in the air. Heavy. Waiting to break. We had pushed them into a corner. We had shown the neighbors the truth, and people were talking, whispering about new elections, about change, for the first time in years. The board's power wasn't untouchable anymore, but cornered animals don't lie down quietly. They bite. And that's when the real war began. It started small, a scratch across the side of my truck one morning. At first I thought it was an accident, maybe a kid with a bike, but then the next day, the tires slashed. Not once, not twice, but all four at once. That wasn't kids. That was a message. The same week, our Wi-Fi went out. The technician said someone had cut the line near the pole. Coincidence? Maybe, but my wife didn't believe in coincidences anymore. She stood at the window that night, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "They want us scared," she whispered. "They want us to stop." But we didn't stop. The letters came next, not official envelopes with stamps and fines. Anonymous ones, slid under the door at night. "Leave now before it's too late." Bad things happen to those who don't follow the rules. One even had newspaper clippings glued on it like some crime show ransom note. I remember holding those papers in my hand, my stomach twisting. This wasn't about violations anymore. This was personal. The board wasn't just fighting for power, they were fighting for survival. But the strangest part was the silence of the neighbors, the same people who had cheered at the meeting, who had whispered about elections. They went quiet. No more knocks on our door. No more notes of support. Just silence. Curtains pulled tighter. Eyes looking away. Fear had crawled back into the street, and fear always helps the ones in control. My wife stayed calm on the outside, but I could see it in her eyes at night, when the house went dark and the neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. She didn't fear for herself. She feared for me, for us, because she knew desperate people only grow darker. And then, the board showed us just how dark they could go. One morning, a notice was posted on the community bulletin board. Emergency HOA meeting. No details, just a date and time. The neighbors whispered again, some curious, some worried. We knew it wasn't just a meeting, it was a trap. That night, the community hall lights glowed harsh under the cold sky. The room was packed, but the energy was different this time. The board sat stiff at the front, faces pale but eyes burning with anger. And when the meeting began, their target was clear. Us. They called us out by name. They accused us of destabilizing the community, of inciting rebellion against the board. They even tried to twist my wife's badge against her, saying she was intimidating neighbors with her position. The words dripped with venom, with fear hidden behind authority. The crowd sat silent. No. One spoke, no one defended us. It was as if the entire room was waiting to see who would fall first. I looked at my wife, expecting fire, expecting her to fight. But instead, she smiled, calm, sharp, unshaken. And when they demanded she respond, she stood slowly, binder in her hand, voice steady. "You're right," she said softly. "I am intimidating." Gasps filled the room. The board leaned forward, ready to pounce. But then she continued, "Not because of my badge, not because of my job, but because I read your rules better than you did." The room shifted, the neighbors stirred, and for a moment, the power tilted back. But the board wasn't done. They brought out witnesses, neighbors who had once been friendly, now standing against us, accusing us of harassment, of spying, of creating fear. Each testimony cut deep, not because it was true, but because it was betrayal. Faces we trusted, voices we welcomed into our home. Now twisting the knife, that was the night I realized something terrifying. It wasn't just the board against us anymore. It was the whole system, the rules, the fear, the silence of people too scared to stand up. We weren't fighting a few board members, we were fighting the entire machine of suburban control and machines. Don't break easily when we walked home that night. The air felt heavier than ever. Every porch light we passed felt like an eye watching us. Every shadow seemed to move closer. And when we reached our front door, taped across it in bold red letters was a single word: traitors. I ripped it down, My hands shaking, my chest burning with anger, but my wife just stared at it, then crumpled it slowly in her fist. "They're losing control," she whispered. "And this is their last defense." But deep inside, I wondered, were we really winning, or were we walking straight into their trap? Because if this was how far they would go just to keep their power, what would they do when they realized they had already lost it? After that night, something inside me shifted. The word traitors burned in my mind. It wasn't just about rules anymore. It wasn't even about Karen anymore. This was war, and war always leaves scars. The neighborhood grew colder with each passing day. Smiles disappeared. Porches went dark earlier. Conversations stopped when we walked by. Even the children, once free and loud, played quieter, like the street itself had lost its voice. But the board wasn't quiet. They moved in the shadows, planning something bigger, something final. We felt it in the air, like a storm building in the distance, and then it came. One morning, a notice arrived, this time. Not slipped under our door, not taped to our mailbox. It was delivered by hand, by the vice president himself. He didn't speak. He didn't make eye contact. He just shoved it into my hand and walked away. Inside was a single sheet of paper, bold letters across the top. Special vote, removal of homeowners. My chest tightened. I read it again and again, not believing it. They weren't just trying to fine us anymore. They weren't just trying to scare us. They were trying to erase us, kick us out of the neighborhood, strip us of our home. Everything we had built. I showed it to my wife. She didn't flinch. She didn't panic. She just folded the paper carefully and placed it on the table. "Then we fight," she whispered. But this fight was different. This wasn't rules we could follow. This wasn't complaints we could file. This was war in plain sight. Us versus them. And the entire neighborhood watching. The days leading up to the vote were the longest of my life. We felt eyes on us everywhere. Cars slowed when passing our house. Curtains twitched when we stepped outside. Anonymous letters returned. Uglier this time. "You don't belong here. Leave before we make you leave. Sheriff or not, you'll lose." Every word wepusihu. As poison, but my wife never showed fear. At night, when I couldn't sleep, I'd find her at the kitchen table, the rule book open, her badge beside it. She wasn't just planning to fight. She was planning to win. And then the night of the vote arrived. The community center was overflowing. Neighbors filled every seat, every corner. The air heavy with whispers and tension. The board sat at the front table, their faces stiff, their eyes sharp with desperation. They called the meeting to order, and the vote began. But my wife didn't wait for them to finish. She stood slowly, binder in her hand, and spoke. Her voice carried across the room, calm, steady, unshaken. She read every violation the board themselves had broken, every misuse of funds, every ignored bylaw, every abuse of power, page after page, line after line. Their own words turned into weapons against them. The room shifted. Gasps, murmurs, whispers spreading like fire. The board squirmed in their seats, pale, sweating, furious, and still she spoke. Then she told them the truth they never expected to hear, that she was the sheriff, that she had evidence of harassment, stalking, and criminal threats, that the board wasn't just breaking HOA rules. They were breaking the law. The room exploded. Neighbors shouted, some in anger, some in support. The board tried to silence her, tried to call it lies, but the evidence was too strong, and the fear that once belonged to us, now belonged to them. The vote never finished. The meeting collapsed into chaos. Some neighbors stormed out, others stayed, demanding the board resign. And the board, their faces drained of color, sat frozen, powerless. But the war wasn't over yet, because later that night, as we walked home through the quiet streets, we knew desperate people don't surrender easily. They had been exposed, their power cracked, their feet are showing, and that's when they are most dangerous. The street was too quiet, no children playing, no dogs barking, just silence. And in that silence, a sound broke through. The sound of footsteps, heavy, fast, coming from behind us. We turned. In the shadows, figures moved. 3 of them, maybe 4, faces hidden. Voices low. Moving closer. My heart raced. I grabbed my wife's hand. The air felt like it was closing in around us. And then, one voice cut through the night. You should have left when you had the chance. The footsteps behind us grew louder. 3 shadows. No, 4. Closing in on the empty street. The words still rang in my ears. You should have left when you had the chance. I felt my stomach twist. My heartbeat pounding so hard I could barely breathe. This wasn't a warning anymore. This was the end game. We stopped under the glow of a single streetlight. The figures came closer, faces hidden in hoodies, their movements sharp, deliberate. Neighbors' windows glowed faintly. But nobody opened their doors. Nobody looked out. Fear had swallowed the street whole. One of them stepped forward, a tall figure, his voice low but sharp. You embarrassed us. You made us look weak. Another voice joined in. You don't belong here. You never did. My wife stood still. Her hand rested calmly near her belt, near her badge. Her voice didn't shake. You're breaking the law, she said softly. You know how this ends. The figures laughed. One of them pulled something from his jacket, not a gun, but a heavy metal pipe. It glinted under the streetlight, and my blood froze. My mind raced. Do we run? Do we fight? Do we scream for help? But then, before I could decide, my wife moved. Her badge flashed in the light as she raised her voice. Sharp, commanding, powerful. Sheriff's Department. Step back now. The figures hesitated. Their laughter cracked for just a second, and in that second, red and blue lights flooded the street. Deputies surged from both ends of the block. Cars soughed, creaked, doors slammed, voices roared. Hands where we can see them. The shadows froze, caught like rats in a trap. Neighbors finally peeked from behind curtains. Doors cracked open. Whispers filled the night. The board's loyalists, the same ones who had whispered threats and spread fear, were pinned to the pavement, handcuffed, exposed, powerless. I stood frozen, watching as the truth finally unfolded under the flashing lights, because this wasn't random, this wasn't just anger, it was the board's last desperate play, and now, it had collapsed in front of the entire neighborhood. The deputies gathered evidence, the pipe, the threats, the notes. It was all over, and Karen's shadow, the empire she built on fear and petty rules, crumbled once and for all. But the strangest thing was the silence that followed. The next morning, no cars slowed in front of our house. No curtains twitched. No letters appeared in our mailbox. For the first time, the street was quiet in a way that felt real. Not the silence of fear, the silence of relief. Within weeks, the board resigned one by one. Some claimed health reasons. Others moved away quietly. Nobody believed them. Everyone knew the truth. They had lost their throne, and without power, they were nothing. The neighborhood began to change. Lawns grew imperfect. Mailboxes stood uneven. Children played louder than ever before, and for the first time, it felt alive. One evening, Mr. Harris, the old man from the corner, walked up to me with a smile. I told you, he said. She was a queen without a crown, and every crown falls eventually. His words stayed with me. My wife kept her badge on her belt, but she no longer needed to flash it. Her calm smile returned. And this time it wasn't hiding fire, it was peace. But I'll admit something to you. Even now, late at night, when the wind chimes sing softly on our porch, I sometimes feel a chill. I remember Karen's eyes, the way the board whispered in the dark, the way neighbors turned against us so quickly. Power does strange things to people. It makes them cruel. It makes them blind. It makes them dangerous. And yet, it also reveals the truth that no matter how many rules you write, how many fines you issue, how many threats you whisper in the dark, in the end, power only survives if people believe in it. The moment they stop believing, the crown falls. I sit on my porch now, listening to the wind chime, watching the street glow under the lamps. The lawns are messy, the fences uneven, the mailboxes mismatched. It's imperfect, and that's exactly why it feels perfect. Karen is gone. The board is gone. The rules are gone. But the lesson remains. Sometimes the quietest streets hide the loudest wars. And sometimes, the sheriff doesn't carry a gun to win the fight. She just carries the truth. And now I want to ask you, If you had the chance to stand against an HOA that abused its power, would you fight to bring it down like we did? Or would you stay silent and let the crown remain on their heads?